Good evening and a very warm welcome on a very autumnal day to our 10th Wednesday webinar from World Horse Welfare. You are kindly joining us by Zoom. So if you've joined us before, you'll know we just have to slightly mark time as we wait for those viewers who are joining us from Facebook Live to come online as well. So thank you very much for joining us. We've, over the last 10, well, it's actually 20 weeks because we've done them every fortnight. It's funny to think that back in mid-June when we started, the days were long and the temperatures were warm and there was no rain. Now everything's reversed, but I hope you have enjoyed the webinars. We've covered a variety of topics, from weight management to pasture management to colic, and this evening around equine end of life. And if you do have any suggestions of what we might want to do on future webinars, then please email those to education@worldhorsewelfare.org. So a second welcome to those viewers who are just joining us by Facebook Live. Thank you very much for joining us for our 10th Wednesday webinar, which this evening is on equine end of life. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Bronwen Williams, a trainer and a mental health nurse, and also our own Claire Gordon, who's our Chief Field Officer. The format of the webinar is that we're going to have two 20-minute presentations from Claire and Bronwen, and then we have hopefully half an hour for a Q&A discussion. So that's really where we want you to be involved. So if you're joining us by Zoom, please do post at any stage your questions on the Q&A tab, or you've also got the chat function. And if you're joining us by Facebook Live, then please use the comments section. Anyone watching on Facebook Live, it would also be great if you could now share the live video. All webinars that we've produced since June are on our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy this evening, please do share this with your friends and do encourage others to come, because we're looking to run these webinars through the winter and into the new year. And in that regard, if you've got any topics that you would like us to include, then please do send those through to education@worldhorsewelfare.org. So to get us started, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to have a quick poll question. I'm just trying to work out how to find my the poll question is that's not the one I'm looking for. Sorry about this. You would have thought I could have done this 10 times, but I still can't do it. So I'm going to try one more time to share my screen. Well, I can't do that at the moment. So the question for the poll is, have you ever had to make a decision to euthanize your horse? As ever, there is no right and wrong answer here. We just want to get a feel for who's joining us this evening. So I'm sorry that I can't share my screen with you, or at least the correct part of it. But whilst you're doing that, so there's a series of options there that if you can respond. I'm afraid if you're joining us by Facebook Live, you won't be able to do that. But if you're joining us on Zoom, then please do provide the appropriate response. World Horse Welfare, just a very brief introduction, a charity that was founded in 1927, focused around supporting the horse-human partnership in all its different various ways. We provide care directly through our 4 rescue and rehoming centres in Britain. We do a lot of campaigning and advocacy work. We work in 16 low and middle income countries around the world where working equids are still very much a part of people's livelihoods. And we also support education, which is what tonight's webinars are all about. And this evening we are focusing on equine end of life and how we can prepare ourselves for this. We'll also be covering this topic again later in the winter, because being such a difficult topic to discuss doesn't mean that we shouldn't be discussing it. At World Horse Welfare, we passionately believe we should be discussing it more, because we all strive to do right by our horses, or the horses that we care for. But whilst it's the primary responsibility to give our horses a good life, it's also, as a horse owner, our primary responsibility to give them a good death. And whilst we often quite rightly focus around the equine issues around quality of life and the decision, we often don't think about ourselves and what the impact that euthanasia is going to have on us, both in the short and the longer term. So I'm delighted that we're being joined first by Claire, our Chief Field Officer, who's going to talk to us around the equine elements of that, and then by Bron, who's going to talk to us around more the personal, the human aspects of equine end of life and the decision making. And I'm delighted that they're here with this site to share their practical insight. So before moving on to Claire, I haven't been able to share my screen, but Basil hopefully will be able to give you some answers. So there we've got a really good sort of spread. So yes, it was a hard decision, but I know it's for the best. That was 31%. And then a couple of options, no, but I will have to do in the near future, and no, it is something I worry about. That's very understandable. And I hope tonight's webinar is going to be able to provide you some support and some practical insight how we can better prepare ourselves. So I'm delighted to introduce Claire. I haven't been able to share my screen. So Claire, luckily, I remember this because Claire has been with the charity for a good while. So she originally qualified or graduated from Glasgow with a degree in zoology, was an international event groom for a while, then joined, was a equine veterinary nurse at the Edinburgh Veterinary School, then joined the RSPCA, and over 10 years ago, joined World Horse Welfare and is now our Chief Field Officer. Now, you would imagine that Claire would have a great love of horses, and indeed she does. She doesn't currently own a horse, but she's an avid horse rider. She's also an avid bike rider, and just to prove that fact, she has ridden from John O'Groats to Land's End, raising money for the RSPCA and World Horse Welfare. That's wonderful commitment. Claire, it's great to have you with us tonight, and so I'll hand over to you. You'll need to turn off your mute.
Thank you for that. Thanks for the introduction, Rolly. Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen with you. Hopefully it'll work. Start the presentation. There we go. So tonight I'd like to share with you some of my experiences of equine end of life. I feel it's an important topic for us to cover this evening, and something I feel we should be able to discuss more comfortably in society than perhaps we currently do. Strangely, my career choices to date sadly have meant that I've been present with lots of different types of horses when euthanasia decisions have been being made. It has, however, enabled me to gain different perspectives, which I'd like to share a little with you about this evening. For example, my time as a groom and vet nurse at the Dick Vet Equine Hospital, which is the Edinburgh University Vet School, was a bit like being in an A&E department. So I cared for horses who had been admitted with illness or injury. And sadly, as to be expected, not all of those animals could be helped, despite the best efforts of modern medicine and highly skilled vets. And I think most people would understand euthanasia in that context and setting, and I certainly did. And then I saw things from another angle when I joined the RSPCA as an inspector. To carry on the medical analogy, inspectors would be considered like a first responder paramedic in an ambulance arriving at the scene of an accident, except it's animals being rescued rather than humans. And it often involved animals that, particularly wildlife that had been hit by cars in road traffic accidents and were slowly dying on roadsides. So we were trained to be able to carry out emergency euthanasia techniques to enable a humane end to those poor animals. And as an inspector, you also have a firearms license, and in my day we also carried injectable drugs, allowing us to prevent further suffering to those that could not be saved. I also dealt regularly with neglected animals, and sadly some of those had been so badly treated that upon veterinary examination, the only thing left to do for them is to end their suffering and give them a humane death surrounded by kindness in those last moments. Perhaps the best analogy for this sort of experience is it's a bit like being a cross between a social worker and maybe police work. And then finally at World Horse Welfare and the RSPCA, I've supported owners in those very lonely times when they've needed help to make that difficult decision to electively euthanize their animal before it suffers. The best analogy for that is perhaps playing the role of a supportive friend for those people who have no one. So it might be interesting to share with you initially a definition that I used during my job interview when applying to work for both the RSPCA and World Horse Welfare. I've learned over the years that having a euthanasia policy is an essential element of being able to deliver good welfare for animals, and as such I'm always a little suspicious of charities or organisations who say they have a no-kill policy. So during my interview, when I was asked for my views on euthanasia, I started by advising that the word euthanasia itself is of Greek origin and roughly translates as a good death. That made sense to me then, and it still does today, in that I would rather an animal was not left to suffer a slow death and a painful experience, or be left to an unknown fate. Interestingly, over the years, the dictionary definition has changed, and in more recent times, it's added to relieve pain and suffering, which I think starts to show the ethical and moral dilemma surrounding ending life. So I think it would be useful to share some facts that I think all horse owners should be aware of. A study carried out by Advancing Equine Scientific Excellence with support of World Horse Welfare and the Donkey Sanctuary explored attitudes towards equine euthanasia and end-of-life decisions. The results revealed that it's rare for a domesticated horse to die of natural causes, with most requiring either emergency or elective euthanasia. In fact, the study showed that 7 out of 8 horses will require euthanasia, which means it's highly unlikely that you'll find that your horse has just passed away quietly one night in his sleep. And what I found really interesting from this study is that the number of equines who died aged between 7 and 10 was roughly the same as those that died between the ages of 26 and 30. So essentially the loss of an equine can occur at any age, and what we must do is learn how to assess quality of life at all ages, and as owners and keepers be prepared to make those tough decisions to protect the horse's long-term health and welfare. Unfortunately for the vast majority of owners, there will come a time when they will have to make the difficult decision to euthanize their horse, and it's important that people are aware of all the options available and what the right option for them is when the time comes. Even owners and keepers of young, seemingly fit and healthy animals should be aware of the end-of-life options, because illness and accidents can happen at any time or age. So how do we define quality of life? I think it's based on a life worth living, an overall balance of experiences that are positive. For many years, welfare is focused on ensuring a minimum standard, commonly recognised through the 5 freedoms. That's freedom from hunger, from thirst, from discomfort, pain, injury, and disease, and to be able to express normal behaviour and to be free from fear and distress. The work of Professor David Mellor has put forward the 5 domains model that mirrors the 5 freedoms, but allows us to look at the factors that affect the mental state. By ensuring the minimum standards of welfare are met throughout the 5 freedoms, we place the animal out of negative experience, but at best it still just remains in a neutral state. By exploring the 5 domains, we're able to enrich their lives, ensuring they have positive and rewarding experiences, and thus enabling it to be a life well lived. There's much scientific work going on just now to make tools more readily available to help horse owners evaluate their animals' quality of life. And these can be very useful to help notice and track deterioration or changes, and can even be used to help you make those euthanasia decisions. Excuse me. So it's important to know what your options are when it comes to euthanasia and the associated costs and limitations of each. The most common methods are lethal injection, which is your vet putting it to sleep. This is often the most expensive option and still requires a call and payment to the knacker services to uplift the body, whether that be for individual or group cremation, unless you're able to bury your horse on your own land, and that of course is provided you're not on or near a water course. The knacker man in some veterinary practices will also dispatch your horse with a firearm using a free bullet. It's the quickest method and often the most affordable. Local hunts can also provide a knacker service, and at what can be often affordable prices if the horse hasn't had any drugs that would be detrimental to the hounds, and some hunts also have incinerators. Lastly, you can horse to a slaughterhouse and receive a price for its carcass. There's only one slaughterhouse in the UK that currently accepts horses, and that's located in Somerset. For all methods, it's important to consider where and when your euthanasia is carried out. If you're on a livery yard, you must take into account the other people and animals that are around you. You should also consider where the horse is dropped. It needs to be accessible to the knacker lorry. Sadly, there's no dignified way for a body to be removed, and it can be really upsetting for people to witness it. Many people are encouraged to say their goodbyes and then go and have a cup of tea or go for a walk and not watch the body be removed. Commonly, they're winched into the back of a lorry by a leg, and there may already be other deceased animals in the back of the truck, depending on the time of day. This leads me on to the challenge of delayed euthanasia. The Horses in Our Hands study by Bristol University and funded by World Horse Welfare identified delayed death as one of the top 4 priority challenges to equine welfare, alongside unresolved stress and pain behaviours, inappropriate nutrition, and inappropriate stabling or turnout. Sometimes equines suffering from conditions associated with old age or major behavioural issues or injuries that can't be fixed are left untreated and not euthanased when it's the most appropriate course of action. The delay, whether it's willful or through ignorance or because the owner carer is unable to face making that decision, presents a welfare concern for us. The equines are sometimes sold or put out on loan, either as companions or for another purpose that they're not suitable for. And sometimes we find them abandoned. The horses often end up in ever deteriorating circumstances and care, being passed from home to home until welfare organisations are alerted to their plight and we have to step in to take responsibility for them. The decision to euthanize is often delayed due to perceived ethical and moral conflicts or a lack of knowledge and understanding about what options are available and what would be most appropriate for their horse. However, it's important that owners understand the potential impact this delay can have on the welfare of their horse. So I'd like to share with you a few cases that have stayed with me over the years to help illustrate this. Earlier, I mentioned my time at the vet school in Edinburgh. I remember an incredibly obese horse being admitted to the hospital. He was suffering from laminitis and he was one of the fattest horses I've ever seen. His owner was devastated and seemingly unwilling to accept that it would be kindest to put him to sleep. As a nurse at the time, I was obviously not involved in any of the decisions being made, but I recall how I felt when I saw this poor horse suspended in the sling, clanking around whilst I was attending to him in his stable and feeding him. And I was on restricted portions because of his obesity. His pain was being managed and his diet was restricted to aid the weight loss, but it felt like such an alien state to keep a horse in as a flight animal. It was clearly not an intervention that was sustainable, and he started to develop pressure sores from the sling. The owner was frequently seen crying outside his stable, and the horse was eventually euthanized. His plight stayed with me, though, sharpening my thoughts on what quality of life means. He was a really sweet horse, a gentle soul, dearly loved, but the poor management of his weight had led him to suffer. I can only imagine the burden of guilt that the owner had felt. But just because there might be a treatment available, it doesn't mean that it's always the right course of action. And when those treatments fail, we can't bury our heads in the sand, but instead we must make the right decisions for our horses. Although I've never seen a horse in a sling again, I have encountered lots of laminitic horses with owners seemingly in denial about the prognosis and treatment options, and crucially the level of pain that the horse is in, through to horses suffering from conditions like lymphangitis that the vet's no longer attending, through to horses with massively ulcerated sarcoids that are no longer being treated, I guess because effective treatment options have run out. There's a very good book I read recently actually called Being Mortal, which is by a doctor who specialises in geriatric medicine called Atul Gawande. And he recognises a similar effect in human medicine, amongst other things in this book. And he suggests that modern medicine in the Western world promotes treatment options to terminal patients, even though the treatment has debilitating side effects that will vastly reduce their quality of life and may only buy them a couple more months with their loved ones. It was listed in Waterstones as the book we should all read before we die, rather appropriately for this webinar. but it's really good. It's gave me a lot to think about. The second case that I wanted to share with you is that of the first time I came across an old horse who could no longer maintain his body condition close to the end of his natural life. Bearing in mind what I said earlier about 7 out of 8 horses requiring elective euthanasia or emergency euthanasia, what struck me about this case and why it has stayed with me is it was the very first time I'd come across a very elderly equine in very poor body condition, but not being neglected in the traditional sense of the word. He was in a nice clean stable with his dietary needs being met on a farm, and although he was the only equine there, it turned out it was the farmer's daughter's horse who'd long since grown up and left him for over 25 years. I asked them to get a vet out to it and had a conversation with them about quality of life and prepared them for the bad news on his prognosis and to be prepared to expect that euthanasia might be the only realistic option for him. So I was really staggered when later that day they rang me and said that the vet had been out and was happy that the horse was still eating and so could carry on as they were. I and my colleagues have experienced this many times, and too many to remember, in fact. And I used to feel a bit frustrated towards the vets. I would think I've done my bit and I've got the owner to get the vet out and I expected them to say it's time to let them go. But what actually happens in most cases is that they try to treat the horse. They worm them, they do a dental, they run bloods and advise on its dietary needs. And what I've learned over the years is that actually it's the owner's job to make the decision, to instruct the vet, to make the decision to put them to sleep, not the vet's decision to instruct the owner to put the horse to sleep. In fact, we recently had a case where the vet tried to talk the owners out of a euthanasia decision when the owner had already made their mind up, which highlights to me that even for veterinary professionals, it's still a complicated and emotive subject, shaped by our human experiences of suffering, illness and death, and why we should be talking about it more. Equally sad for me is the euthanasia of a physically healthy horse when they've unresolvable, dangerous or difficult behaviour and the owner is unable to manage them. It's unethical and irresponsible for any horse, pony or donkey to either be missold or rehomed without the new owner or keeper being fully aware of the horse's history. Often these horses end up being passed from person to person for less and less money, with their welfare becoming increasingly compromised. Suffering again and again, asked to do things that they're not capable of under saddle, often due to pain. In most cases, the most humane option for a horse that cannot be responsibly rehomed is euthanasia. I wanted to finish by saying I know how hard these decisions are. I had my own horse euthanased in recent years, and it again gave me a new perspective on this subject, which is the emotional involvement when it's your own animal. I found it a very lonely place to be, despite being surrounded by kind friends on a nice livery yard and all the expertise of World Horse Welfare available to me. I felt like I was letting my horse down, and I was judging myself, and I couldn't face explaining my decision to my friends and fellow liveries. I was giving myself a hard enough time without dealing with how they all might be feeling about my decision. I'd been getting lots of help with my horse due to his behavioural issues from my trainer, and I'd been based at her yard for most of the summer. So in the end, I consulted only with her, whom I trusted and knew she knew my horse as well as I did. And she supported my decision and thought I was doing the right thing. So I went back there and had him euthanized at her yard. I still feel rotten about it almost 2 years on, but I do know deep down that I did the right thing. So I'd like to finish finally by saying that there is help out there. World Horse Welfare has 16 field officers doing the same job as me, and between us we cover the whole of the country, and we can help you, support you through your decision-making process, as my trainer did for me. We also have a just-in-case pack that asks you to consider what you should want to do should an emergency occur when you're not around, and to note it down and leave it with your yard manager or family, just in case. And there should be a link, I think, coming up to the just-in-case resources that we can send out. So you can have peace of mind then that things will be dealt with in the way that's right for you and your horse, should you not be there. And in fact, over the last 4 years, horse welfare field officers have been receiving training from Bronwen Williams, who's about to speak to you next, to better enable us to support you during these difficult times. So I will pass you back to Roly, ready to hear from Bronwen, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful, and just so many things that came out of there which would be great to pick up on in the Q&A discussion. But what resonated with me was that the person you trusted, and I think there's a real lesson there, because that person is going to be different for so many of us, isn't it? You know, whether it's the vet, whether it's your partner, whether it's a delivery yard owner, it's just knowing who you can trust and who you can, just because these are really difficult decisions. So thank you for that. There's plenty to catch. So please do, if you're on Facebook, use the comment section, and if you're on Zoom, use the Q&A or the chat function. Now, before I introduce you to Bron, I'm going to try and prove that I am not completely inept, quite inept, but not completely, by seeing if I can actually get my, there you go. So we are going to have a second poll question. This one is: do you feel comfortable sharing your experiences or your fears on horse youth, or sorry, your feelings on horse euthanasia? And we've got a series of options there, 3 around yes, and then a couple around struggling, and 1 around no. So take a look at that, and it would be great if you could just respond to that, as I say, if you're on Zoom. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you to Bronwen Williams. If I can get my slide. I'm having a bad day today. There you go. Yeah, Bronwen Williams, registered mental health nurse who's had a lifetime in the horse world. Now, I asked Bron, or we asked Bron, for something that we might not know about her, and I think this is great. Bronwen, its claim to fame is Metallica, which, for those of you who don't know, is a US heavy metal band, as far as I'm aware. But their road manager wanted to elope with Bron because he liked her homemade lasagna. And she presents a local rock show on her local radio even today, which is obviously a good perspective on life, as well as her world within the equine world and as a mental health nurse. So, Bron, it's brilliant to have you with us. Before I hand over to you, a whistle-stop tour back to poll 2, and I think Basil can provide us with the results. So more of a clear majority here, 43% saying, yes, I find it very helpful to be able to talk about it. And that's, you know, that I'm sure will resonate with Bron. And I struggle to talk about it because it makes me upset. And that will certainly resonate with many of you, including myself. So thank you for taking part in those polls. Bron, over to you. Just need to come off mute.
There, now I'm off mute.
Yeah, you go. You're on.
I'll try again. Thank you, Roly, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this really important subject. Thank you to Claire, who's outlined so many important points for us as horse owners. So I've always been fascinated by the relationships that we humans have with animals, and what happens when they die is part of that relationship. So I'm pleased to be here talking about euthanasia, bereavement, and death. The loss of my very special horse after 27 years together made me focus even more on this particular area. And more recently, I've been thinking about how we make those decisions, those difficult decisions and changes. And more recently, I've been thinking about how we make difficult decisions with my friend and colleague who's helped me with these ideas, and some of them that have formulated some of the thinking for today. And I had conversations with her about the decision to euthanize, in conversation with her about her particular experience that she had with her dog Pip. As a mental health nurse and as an educator, I talk to people about their feelings, and sometimes these are about death. Frequently in my job, this is around thoughts or plans for suicide. I teach many different professionals how to work with those who are suicidal. We know from the evidence that we do no harm by asking someone if they're suicidal. We won't put the idea into their heads if the idea isn't already there. But often we don't feel comfortable, and a lot of the professionals that I work with don't feel comfortable in asking and talking about these things. So I think sometimes what I talk to people about with suicide is just listening is really, really important. And I think similarly, we need to be upfront about animals and euthanasia. We need to talk openly about it, and that's what I'm going to focus on, as Claire has done for the next few minutes. But let's start at the beginning, our relationship with animals. Humans have formed relationships with animals for thousands of years. This isn't something new. But there are differences between simple ownership and attachment and emotional involvement with animals. Our animals can be considered our friends or family members. Many people involve animals in celebrations and may buy them presents, do little songs and even dances for them. And it was only recently, a couple of weeks ago, I caught somebody whilst I was training on Zoom who thought they were on mute during a break, who was singing to their dogs. And right now, in a pandemic, animals may be more important to us than ever. So when our animals die, there's going to be an impact. For some of us, this is as bad as when a human who's close to us dies. And for some of us, it's even worse. The experience of grief when there's a loss of a fellow important human is well documented, but there are a number of different models of grief. But actually, most of them don't really have very good evidence bases. There is less in the literature and less understanding about the grief process for an owner or a keeper when an animal dies. What research there is shows that the type of death that the animal has can have different effects on the humans who care about them. Surprisingly, those who chose euthanasia generally are found to have significant closer attachment to their animals and then go on to report significantly less grief than those animals who died of natural causes or perhaps from accidents. And owners whose animals died in accidents actually had extended grief reactions. And now with COVID-19, some owners may not be able to be present when an animal is euthanized. This will probably have significant effects for the experience of grief for many owners of animals. It's not just those who have companion animals. Grief at the loss of an animal or animals also affects those who own or work with animals, including farm animals, and those who work in animal welfare and also in wildlife sectors. And I wonder if also that might happen for those who run or work on equine yards, studs and other facilities. For farmers and those who breed animals, they're a source of income, but the significance for individuals is not diminished. The relationships may be different, but many hold the welfare and the well-being of their animals as very important. Attachments are still formed, as demonstrated by some farmed animals being given names. And in the UK, we've had a number of events in recent years that have hit farmers hard, and those who keep livestock also keep working and companion animals. So there are different levels of attachment and meaning in each case. As most of us will know, the euthanasia of large animals is different to small animals, as Claire's outlined some of those things tonight. It's often traumatic, and it's difficult, and it can be risky. The very nature of lifespans being different for humans and most animals means that people will very often outlive their animals, sometimes many times over. Different types of loss can give rise to different grief experiences, and we will look at some of these next. So if we have animals, it's going to happen. So we need to be thinking about how we experience that. So the first type of experience that is documented is anticipatory loss. This is where an owner or a keeper knows that an animal will die or will need to be euthanized at some point. Anticipatory loss can be useful though. It's painful, but it can also forewarn us that we may then go on to experience less grief when the animal does die. It can actually be helpful. I would suggest that this is where thinking and talking about death is important. We need to consider the loss of our animals, the impact it will have upon us, and what support we can get, and how to plan for the event when it does eventually happen. This can stand us and our animals in good stead for when the inevitable comes around. But grief isn't always due to the death of an animal. There's another type of experience which is known as ambiguous loss. And this is one of the most difficult experiences of grief. It's caused when we're separated from an animal, perhaps due to something like a relationship breakup, moving accommodation, having to give the animal up due to an inability to keep it, or to afford it anymore, or due to theft, or an animal becoming lost. Not knowing what has happened to an animal can complicate the grief reaction, and people may spend time ruminating about what could have been done differently. And then there's disenfranchised grief. This links back to the relationships that many of us have with our animals and how we have bonds with them. Quite often, these bonds aren't recognised by others or by society. Therefore, when an animal dies, others underestimate or don't understand the impact and the subsequent grief response for someone. Worse still, people may be ridiculed for their feelings, and they may feel they have to hide their grief from friends, from work colleagues, and even from family. Well-meaning but unhelpful comments that can be very painful can be made, such as, "It was only an animal," or "You can get another one." Some other experiences: dual grief. An animal can be linked to another human who's died or who's no longer in our lives. Unresolved grief for that lost human can also be triggered when their animal, that link to that lost person, dies at a later date. There can also be further issues if the animal dies from the same disease or a similar disease to that which the human died. And so they're a linking object to something previous, and when they go, we experience grief not just from what we've lost now, but what we might have lost in the past. Ritual is an important part of the process of death. However, there is a lack of rituals after an animal dies, which can be compounded with any disenfranchised grief, that lack of understanding from others. The loss of large animals or one large animal and the disposal of their bodies, as we've heard from Claire, brings further problems and possibly trauma. So what can help us as animal owners when the inevitable happens? There are a number of things that we can do, or we can support others to do when they lose animals, which can help the grief process. We can keep an item, a transitionary object, either something belonging to the animal or a part of the animal, such as the ashes, fur clippings, a piece of mane or tail, sometimes made into lockets, bracelets, or other items. We can write about the animal. We can make albums. We can frame photographs. We might plant commemorative plants or trees. We might have reminiscing ceremonies of scattering ashes, of remembering, and commemorative events. My friend and vet who put my horse down will send me a text quite often on the anniversary of the day of him going. So let's think a moment about our vets. Vets may want to and do often put their own animals to sleep themselves. They want to do that one last important thing for their animals. Vets statistically deal with death much more than those of us like me working in human health. It's a repetitive and frequent occurrence, on average, I think, for a vet around 4 times a week. Vets and veterinary staff are often affected by the death of animals, their own and other people's. Vets have to manage the animal, its welfare, and also help those who own the animal. And now with COVID-19, the euthanasia of animals has to be done differently quite often, without owners present or in different ways. Staff may build significant relationships with animals and their owners, often over many years, and experience their own grief when an animal dies. When my old horse was put to sleep, my friend and vet, and this is the only bit that makes me a bit tearful in this presentation. When my horse was put to sleep, my friend and vet and the veterinary nurse and I sat on the ground with him after he'd gone, and we cried and talked together. And I'm grateful for that. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I thought about the myths that might be out there, especially for those of us that are horse owners. These are the ones that I thought about. I came up with 3 rough ones, and I wonder if you've got other ones that you might think of. Claire's covered perhaps some of these already, but if you think of some, perhaps let us know through the chat or on Facebook. The first one is, the vet will make the decision. They rarely do. We may need to bring up the subject for them to discuss with us. So don't wait for them to drop it into the conversation. When they have to do it, it may be when things are going really, really wrong. The next one I thought of, the next myth, the animal will tell me when he's ready. All animals, including us humans, have an inbuilt mechanism to stay alive at all costs. Our animals will keep struggling on, especially horses, as that's what they're wired to do. And the third myth, or possible myth I thought of, He'll just go to sleep one day and not wake up while Claire's blown that one out the window with her slide. We would all love this to happen, but we know it rarely does. Remember the research about those who euthanased generally had better grief reactions? Well, that's one of the things that I always remind myself about when I'm coming up to a difficult decision. So how do we make that decision to make that decision to euthanize? I suggest we need to be clear about what our values and our beliefs are about death, about euthanasia and our animals. I think we need to be really clear about these. This is why we need to talk about it and to plan for and to have conversations way before the event, just as we're doing this evening. If we are clear about our plans for as many eventualities, you won't cover everything, but as many as you can think of, when they do come around sooner or later, we'll be sure in our decisions when we need to be. Others around us may have different beliefs or values, and so try to change us to their way of thinking. Perhaps to not have a horse euthanized when we feel that it should be done. At the point of making the euthanasia decision, we can be very vulnerable and easily swayed, as we may doubt ourselves. If we think about euthanasia, talk about it, plan before, no matter how painful that is for us, it will help us do the right thing for our animals and for ourselves, and with more certainty when the time comes. Those around us, perhaps partners, friends, family members, fellow horse owners, perhaps on the same yard as us, may think we should do something different. Remember too that they have their beliefs and values which may not exactly match ours. It is our decision to make and to do the right thing, but we can still respect others' opinions and ask them to respect ours. So what helps and supports us to make changes or to make decisions? Well, something called self-efficacy. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, especially around euthanasia. Self-efficacy is that internal belief that we individually have about our ability to make any decision or to take an action or to make a change. There are 4 elements identified that help our self-efficacy. So let's have a look at what these are and how they might help our self-efficacy or self-belief that we can take the right decision at the right time to euthanize. The first of these elements is called mastery experiences. These are skills and abilities we gain when we take on a new challenge and succeed. This might sound a bit strange when we're thinking about euthanasia, but once we've experienced the euthanasia of an animal, we perhaps are more prepared to know what to expect, even if it's still difficult and traumatic. I'd suggest the gaining of accurate information and also having a plan and discussing this plan with those important to it, including our vet, allow us to rehearse in our heads what we need to do. This can help us have mastery. So be informed, ask for information, make a plan and review it. Next, to help our self-efficacy are vicarious experiences. These vicarious experiences are when we model our behaviour on others, what we see others do and achieve, or in the case of euthanasia, when people make difficult decisions and they cope. So again, ask people for help. Discuss with them how they made the decision to euthanize, how they got it right. You'll be helping yourself, but also you may just be helping that person too. Many of us actually welcome talking about our experiences of euthanasia and bereavement, and you've seen that both Claire and I have done that as part of our presentations today. Third, for self-efficacy, is verbal persuasion. This is the way others talk to the person who needs to make the decision or make a change. The words that they use, their attitudes and tone. So I'd suggest choose the people who will support you in the right ways. Be choosy. It's easy to go around many people asking them for their opinion and end up more confused than ever, as everyone may have a very different view of what you should do. And when a friend or someone we know is making the decision to euthanize, we can help by listening, by supporting them, by being kind and warm, and keeping our own opinions and beliefs to ourselves, unless they're really asked for. And the fourth element that helps us make a decision and self-efficacy is our emotional and psychological states. So that's the context for the person, how they are within themselves at that time and how able they are to think about making a change or making a decision. Perhaps if we can be a little bit more informed, being aware of that anticipatory grief, understanding what's happening when we hurt as we know we're getting closer to the time when we'll need to let them go. Perhaps thinking about disenfranchised grief, knowing that some people around us just won't get it. And so part of the plan for the euthanasia of our horses perhaps should be planning for taking care of ourselves and knowing who we can rely on for the right sort of support. And added to this is the rituals we can plan to mark the bereavement. And also being aware that this animal may link us to others who we may have already lost, or perhaps to a person. So I'm going to talk to you very briefly about a model of grief. This isn't one that you usually come across. The usual ones that are churned out about grief, actually there's very little evidence base for them, and they may be slightly incorrect. So what in this, the dual process model of grief, it suggests that what happens is that there's two types of places that we can be within our grief. This can be animals, whatever sort of loss orientated and restoration orientated. And what it does is this model, why I really like it, is it recognizes that grief is dynamic. It's complex. It recognizes that grief can be messy and it ebbs and it flows. So the loss orientated activities are when we focus on and are preoccupied with the loss, where we yearn for what is lost or gone, and where we may actively seek out triggers to cause sorrow. And the second type of activities are these restoration orientated ones, where we make life and role changes, alter our activities or do new ones, look for distractions from our experience of grief. Both of these types of activities are really important, and it's normal to move backwards and forwards quite frequently between the two areas. Experiencing grief is important to the process of coming to terms with a bereavement, but the lack of movement towards those restoration orientated activities can cause issues in the process. However, just focusing on restoration orientated activities exclusively can mean that the grief is not addressed. We might find ourselves forgetting for a moment what we have lost, and even laughing or feeling happy as we are distracted, and then feel guilty as we remember and move ourselves back to that loss orientated activities. But this dual process model really helpfully, I think, recognizes the need for respite from grief. And that's something for all of us to remember when we lose a horse. It's okay to have a little bit of time or respite from the grief and not to feel bad about it. Animals are important to many of us. The death of an animal is a real bereavement and should be treated as such. Our relationships with our animals should be recognised and they should be honoured. So we've been thinking about endings, but endings are also beginnings. 6 years ago, my beloved horse Badger, pictured here a few weeks before he was euthanased by my good friend and vet. It was a planned event that we talked about for several years, but it was very difficult. But it led me to becoming interested in bereavement in animal owners and to several published papers with my friend and vet. And then my conversations with my colleague and friend about her pip dog started this train of thoughts that led me to me talking to you this evening. So my final slide. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute now. Not. Thank you, Bron. That was wonderful, and God, rich in content and so much to talk about. And I think your discussion around self-efficacy, self-belief, and the various aspects of that very much sort of resonated and followed on from Claire's presentation. So much to get into there, and thank you very much. We are going to now go into a discussion session, and they're coming thick and fast. So thank you very much. We'll try and do our best to get through as many as we can. We had quite a specific question, but I thought it was a really good opener. I have a standardbred who is 9 years old, just been diagnosed with wobblers. The past nearly 2 months, his whole personality has changed. He's become quite dangerous, kicking at people, lunging towards people, not coming in, when in the stable, kicking holes in the walls, box walking, weaving, tripping from front and back, and much more. This is not him at all. I'm scared for him and myself, and he looks scared as well. My question is, should I have him put to sleep? Can wobblers affect the brain? I want to do what's best for him, but I'd hate myself if I put him to sleep for no reason. Bron, there's all sorts of things going on there. What are your thoughts?
I can't advise on that because I'd say really that is just the hardest decision to make. I know I've been fairly lucky that my horses have always been fairly old when they've gone. I think, Claire, can I hand that one over to you? I'm going to be really sneaky here, and because that is not my area with something that's young with a particular disorder like that.
Well, I would certainly say, like, we wouldn't be qualified to talk at a webinar about the veterinary diagnosis of his condition, but I can certainly reassure you that you're asking yourself all the right questions and making all the right observations about his behavior, and seeing what he's not coping with that he used to be able to cope with, and engaging with your vet, getting their guidance about what his prognosis is, and that you're the right person as his owner to be the ones recognizing these changes and whether it is appropriate to try and treat him or to euthanize him. But it certainly sounds like a very serious condition that needs urgent veterinary support.
Absolutely, thank you, Claire. One from Melon here. It's not just thinking about euthanasia when a horse is is ill or injured. This is a plea for all horse owners to think about what would happen to their horses if they are unable to care for them due to their own illness, and make a written plan for each horse while calm and rational. I've had a cancer diagnosis recently, and there is nobody to care for my horses if my treatment doesn't work. I've discussed euthanasia of my oldest horse with my vet because I think this would be in her best interests, and also looked at legacy for. Well, she's also very kindly looked at a legacy for World Horse Welfare for the other horses, for horse gifting in the will scheme. I didn't expect to be making these decisions in my 50s. Bron, that must resonate with a lot of what you've talked about.
Yeah, I absolutely get that, because I'm also in my 50s, and my thoughts are, especially in lockdown, if I go into, if I become poorly because of what we've got going around at the moment, what am I going to do with my animals, and especially a big animal? Absolutely, I really get that. I think the fact that that questionnaire is here, is talking about it, and I'd say keep on doing that, and you're doing absolutely the right things. Because you're putting out there, you're talking, you're thinking about it. I think we should all be making plans for ourselves for end of life and what we want to happen if we become incapacitated, but also for animals. I'm really pleased to hear that people are thinking in that way, even in our very young 50s.
Yeah, thank you.
Roly, I could add there, Roly, that that I've come across that situation a few times in my job as a field officer, where people who have a terminal diagnosis have contacted the charity and said, could you come and meet me? I want to tell you about my horses. And they've drawn a map, of like how to find their fields, and how to locate which bits where their horses are, in case I wasn't still at the charity by the time that they had passed away. And like this lady has said, they've put a plan in their will so that we could come and help sort their horses after their passing. So at the time it felt like a really strange kind of visit to be making to someone, but I kind of hugely respected them, and it was really lovely for them to be able to share with me how like all the sort of foibles of their horse and all the things that we would want to know to ensure the horse was well looked after they'd passed.
Yes, thank you for that. Question from William. Is it one for Claire? Is there a way, or should you also show field mate stable friends the carcass of a dead horse to explain the loss?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's certainly something that I've seen happen a lot. Horses have the same bonding and attachments just like we do to each other. And giving them that sort of peace and quiet to sort of explore the horse's body themselves and make sense of it. And in their own time, they then usually walk away, and you know that sort of things are right. And donkeys particularly, it's really important because they suffer from a condition called hyperlipemia, and then breaking that pair bond in a donkey can bring that on and be quite a serious fatal condition for them.
Thank you. I mean, I'm in danger anthropomorphizing, which you should never do. But my experience of horses and donkeys, when they see their friend having been put to sleep, they seem very matter of fact. They'll smell, and then they walk away. And it obviously doesn't have the emotion of human, but it does seem to be a really important thing to do. So I'm not sure there's any research around that. But William would probably say yes, do. But again, it's what you're happy to do. There's a lot of decisions to make here. Thinking about anticipatory loss, Williams also asked Bron around, his one regret when he made the difficult decision is no one, the vet or the collector, asked if he wished to take a snip of mane or tail hair as a keepsake.
Yeah, I saw that one. And once it's gone, isn't it? And I found that really difficult. And maybe that's something to remind us all, if we know of somebody that's in that situation, whether we're in that professional as a vet or, just remind people or do it for them. It's again, it's about watching out for other people, I think, because when you're in the moment and you're trying to get everything done and the tasks done, that can be, you perhaps not focusing on what your needs are going to be, a little way, later on today or tomorrow or the next week. So I think it's really important to have people around you. I know for my bereavement processes for my animals, that if I've had somebody that is really supportive and doesn't offer me anything apart from a cup of tea and just listening as I burble on and handkerchiefs, then that's the most powerful thing, is just somebody, that will support us without trying to make it okay, and think of those practical things as well.
Thank you, Bron. And then Claire, just thinking about the more practical things, Michelle's asked, what is the cost of the lethal injection compared with the other options? Does the vet call also take the body away? And what if you want burial? How would you arrange this?
Yeah, so it obviously varies regionally and nationally. Things are more expensive and less expensive at different parts of the country, but for the most part, you would be looking at, for a non-emergency situation, so when you're just calling the vet out on a sort of booked appointment, it would be in the region of £150 to £250 to have them put the horse to sleep. But then you would have the carcass disposal on top of that. So you would be looking at another £200 to £250 on average to have the body uplifted. I think so long as you own the land that you wish to bury the horse on, and so long as it's not near a water course, that you can do it on your own land. But to be safe, I would check with planning people to make sure you're not breaking the law.
And then in terms of, so burial, that's absolutely right. And obviously there is a cheaper option through, I mean, it's a horrible term, knackerman, isn't there? But I mean, that's, so just in case material that we talked about earlier, and we'll put up another link to it later, also has further information around that.
So the knacker would be, for the euthanasia and the body removal, on average, around that same price range of £200 to £250. But I would just say that I think before I had dealt with many knacker men, I had sort of images in my head of knacker men being associated with slaughterhouse and it being a kind of frightening and horrible experience. But I actually have to say that some of the knacker men that I've dealt with over the years are some of the most compassionate and kind professional people that I've come across. And going back to William's comment earlier, everyone that I've ever seen, they've taken that moment to say, they usually do it actually, and just put a little plait in the mane and snip it off, and then they then say, is this something you want to keep? And they sometimes they'll pull the shoes off and give them the shoes, things like that. So they're certainly very compassionate people, generally, the professional.
Definitely, I would certainly echo that. Bron, comment on Facebook. All done and in place for my old girl of 30. I assume that's the planning. However, I had not planned for my 23-year-old who passed away very suddenly in April. All the planning in the world, and there we go. So planning is such an important part of it, and plan for the unexpected.
I've just taken on a rescue cat, and I've just had a conversation with my vet that I need to insure him up to the hilt because I know he's come out of a smoking environment. He's 9. I'm already thinking I've got him for how long, and if I get a few more years out of that, perhaps I'm weird, I don't know, but I'm already, as I take an animal on, I'm thinking about what this animal might need, because that is the cost. I think we pay the cost, not when we have the animal, but we pay the cost at the end. And I'm not talking money here, I'm talking that emotional cost as well as the financial. So I think that's something that we take on. It perhaps that's the way I think, but that's the package. You have an animal, and part of that package and that responsibility, for how I see it, is thinking about what you might do. And it may come suddenly, but at least you've got a little clue that you thought about it occasionally at some time. Yeah, it's certainly been easier for me, where I've talked to my vet and a couple of other people about what I might need and what I might need to do in different scenarios over perhaps a 2 or 3 year period. I know that's not the same when it's an emergency, but I think we should all be thinking about it, even if our horses and our other animals are fit and dandy.
Yeah, excellent. Claire Haley's asked, in the UK, is animal communication much used to help in decision making? Here in France, she says it's becoming much more popular.
What does animal communication mean? Like,
well, I assume actually trying to communicate directly. You know, you're I mean, some will call that horsemanship, but I suppose it's more advanced than that. Is my assumption.
It's not something I've come across.
No, it's not something I'm aware of. Bron, are you aware of anything in those regards?
Very new, nothing that I've heard of before. No.
But we often talk about, don't we? Our animals do talk to us, and it's through the signs, it's through the small changes that they make. And I suppose that, I mean, Haley, do come back to us if you want to ask again on that. Then, Bron, Julie's well, it's not asked actually. Again, and so many of you have been brilliant in sharing your stories and your experiences. And Julie says, I've had to make 2 euthanasia decisions within 2 months between August and just last week, and losing 2 dear horses. I feel totally drained and exhausted. I know the decision was the right decision. One was an emergency 6 weeks after surviving colic surgery, and the other was only 9, but diagnosed with kissing spines, ulcers, ligament damage, and curved hocks. I knew he could not cope with the treatment or being turned away to a retirement field, as he just jumped out of the fields. It was so hard. Bron, I suppose that's just a,
what a brave decision. You know, the colic surgery, and then you know all of the stress that with that, and then 6 weeks later, and then another horse as well. What a brave decision. I'd just go back to that dual process model that I've always found that really useful. That it's okay to seek out things. I would take the pieces of mane or tail that I still have for my old horse, and I'd smell them if I needed to go into that loss bit, to prompt me to go into that loss area. But also, you know, perhaps think about the things that you can do to help you be more supported into moving and moving on in your life without forgetting them, but making that integrated into your life and celebrating them. I will share though that I cried the day that the smell went, because I went to smell them one day and no longer did they smell of badger, and that was even worse. So, you know, go with the unexpected, but and I think probably be gentle with yourself. There's some research that says you can expect to be experiencing grief for an animal that you've been really close to for between 1 and 2 years. So, you know, it ain't gonna go. It doesn't go away. I guess it gets lighter, and it is important to stay with it sometimes. But bless you, what a difficult and brave decision.
Megan's asked why I believe we should never anthropomorphize, and I think that's a brilliant question, but possibly you haven't got time to do that today, but we'll certainly come back to that. A comment from Facebook, it happened to me as an 11-year-old, sudden, and the vet helped us. We hadn't discussed it. So Claire, you know, obviously the vet often is a really important part of the decision-making process, not that they can tell people, but they are in terms of that support process.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you know, vets, you know, so hard for them. I think Bronwen alluded to that earlier. They're sort of, you know, frequently having to deal with death and being the agent of that death and dealing with their own emotions and feelings about it, regardless of what's going on in their personal life, whether they've recently lost their own animals and things, and, you know, the human situation, and yet they're having to manage the owner's feelings towards it. It's tough job being a vet, and yeah, I don't know. Oh,
I
quite a
think
lot of respect.
we should be sending them cards, Claire, rather than them sending us cards.
Mari, she's asked a number of questions here, Bron, but I'll probably just stick with the first. They become your life without knowing it. When you euthanize, it's a struggle to know what to do with yourself.
Yeah.
How do you, sorry, that's just moved up. How do you know if getting another is the right decision for you? Mentally, is getting another way of avoiding the grief?
Do you know, I can't answer that one. I know what I do for me personally. It's different each time. I think, you know, I think for me, I believe it's possible to have another animal and still grieve for the other one. It isn't replacing the other one. That's my belief. I think I'd go back to, what are your beliefs and what are your values and what will fit right with you? I don't think you can get it wrong half the time, really. I don't think you can get it wrong. I think it's probably the animal that's gone, you've made the right decision and you've done best by them. Now you need to do best by yourself. And for me, that's perhaps thinking, is there another animal out there that I can give a home to, even if I'm a bit wonky at the moment? That's my thinking. But I think it's really do the best for yourself. You've done the best for that animal. It's done and dusted. Now do the best for whatever that is for you.
Thank you. Yes.
And take time to do it. Don't think it's going to be, it's okay to still be feeling rubbish on and off for quite a while.
Of course, yes. Thank you, Bron. Claire's a question here about lethal injection and captive bolt are too slow, and I have seen firsthand how horses struggle to stay alive with the injection method. What is your experience?
I would agree. I mean, captive bolt's not a preferred method of euthanasia for horses, because horses tend to fall forward when they drop, so it can be dangerous to the person carrying out the euthanasia, essentially. But yeah, when I worked at the hospital, they used to put horses, they wouldn't want people around when they put the horses to sleep, because horses react differently to the drugs, and some fight it and thrash around, and some, you know, just drop and it's fine. So I can, my preference is to use a bullet, because it's so quick. The horses can be eating from a bucket 1 second and gone the next. It's very definite. Whereas, when it's an injection, you're having to watch for the signs of life leaving, and for me that's really tough and hard. But it's up to individuals. A lot of vets will sedate a horse before they then give the injection, to sort of already put them in a quieter frame of mind.
Absolutely. I think the evidence is there to show that actually a free bullet does bring around a quicker end. But I think you also raise a really good point, sedation as part of the process, because it is, then you do relax the horse, and that can, so, and also with all bodies, once they've been put to sleep, you do get these reactions, don't you? These nervous reactions, which are literally just that. It doesn't mean there's still life there, but it can be very traumatic. And Claire, another one for you. I'm soon going to be losing our pony, and it's currently breaking my heart. She is currently in a herd with another lady, another lady's field, but I still regard her as mine, in my mind. And the lady asked my views on the mare's current welfare. I saw her last week, and she is lost in her eyes, and she is not alive and happy. She looks empty. She has early signs of Cushing's, but the lady thinks there's more going on. I don't know what to do.
So if I'm sort of hearing that right, they're not on the same page about where they think that horse is in terms of its quality of life. Is that?
I think she's just obviously not there all the time, and she's living with another lady. So I'm not sure there's a difference of opinion, but she's obviously, recognizing, I think, if I've understood this correctly, that, she's at a distance, but she feels she's got to make decision, but she's not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, and especially to not be the primary carer, to be, because what I was saying about earlier with these quality of life assessment tools is sometimes, that can help you see these changes, because if you're there every day, sometimes you can get used to seeing what you see, and it's only when you've been away and then come back, you can kind of be like, oh, actually, it's significantly worse. things. So yeah, it can be hard for the person there all the time, and it can be hard for the person who's not the primary carer and coming in and then feeling that things are worse, and perhaps the other person doesn't see it. But I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to kind of handle it, but I think the best thing to do is to sit down and talk about it, and to you know,
and
share.
probably seek veterinary help as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Definitely, no, obviously. Thank you, Claire. Bron, Anne said, she said, I felt like I was killing my best friend when I had my first pony put to sleep. It was booked a week in advance, so anticipatory. This felt like one of the worst weeks of my life. It was a great relief once we had said goodbye. However, I missed him terribly and still do. It was much easier to say goodbye to my next two horses in emergency situations, although a great shock.
Yeah, I read that comment as well, and my heart went out to them. And I also picked up Emily's comment, who's like me, a nurse, who talks about end of life, etc., advanced care planning, but it's different when it's with the horses. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about really have a think about your beliefs and values, because like Emily, being a nurse, I have very clear values and beliefs about death and good deaths, and supporting people and keep, for me, and as a mental health nurse, it's often about keeping people alive and not doing things to themselves. And then with my horses and my animals, I believe in euthanasia. So I have very different beliefs and values as a nurse than I do as an animal owner. And most of the time I can keep those separate. But when I make the decision to have an animal put down, I really get that. I feel like that I'm doing that countdown. I was talking to Claire the other day about this, that I'm counting the breaths that the animal takes. And that's extraordinarily difficult for me as a nurse, and having that responsibility to end something's life. But what I try and do is just say to myself, shut up, Bron, you can do that later. My approach, I don't know if it's right, but it's how I manage it most of the time, is to think, my animal is my number one priority. I'll do the stuff later. I can look after me once that's done. And that's how I juggle it. But I guess it really comes back to what I was saying about, we need to be open and clear about our thoughts and our feelings and our beliefs about death and about euthanasia, because they can be really contradictory. And that once we start talking about it and we get it out there, it can be easier to manage. But I really get that.
So I think you mentioned Emily's comment, but I just pick up as a nurse, I've spent a lot of my career advising people on advanced care planning and importance of planning for the end of our lives, and it's something I've discussed regularly working with those at end of life, and especially recently. However, thinking about advanced planning for my horses is just something I cannot face. My mare is 26 now and fit and well and still in work, but I know it is something I need to think about, but I just don't know how to face up to it. I find it frustrating that I can face it every day in people, but I'm not able to think about it for my own horses. What is the best way for me to approach it without being so upset?
I guess it's finding somebody that would give you the same care and compassion to think and talk about that planning as you do, Emily, as a nurse, for other people. There's nothing wrong with us tough nurses in taking some of the things from some people to get some support that we might give to others. So that's all I can probably suggest as one nurse to another.
And I suppose, it's a bit trite to say, isn't it? But it is easier. It's easier to think about these things, as difficult as it is, in times when the horse, your mare, it's wonderful that she's 26 and still in work. Brilliant. Long may that last. And it will last for a long time. But it's just so much easier to think about it then than it is, when things aren't so good.
We don't like to think about things that will make us uncomfortable. And that's quite understandable and hurt. But I think we perhaps do need to just take some time aside every so often, as Claire says, to have a plan, even if they're young, they're fit and healthy, whatever. I think we just need to just be brave enough to do that, not all the time, but sufficiently at particular times. Vets are great people, or people that you really trust. We've heard about people, that have got people around them that they really trust. Have those conversations with one or two people that you really trust, and then get on enjoying your horse.
Yeah.
And then review that plan every so often. You don't have to be maudlin and have to keep going over it, but just every so often perhaps tap into that.
We are, thank you, Bron. We are nearing at the end, but I'll try and fill in a couple more questions. One from Mari for you, Bron. You can go through grief knowing you've done the right thing for them and you don't have suicidal thoughts, but you feel as though if you not want to wake up, at what point do you get help? How long is it right to feel like that?
Oh, that's a fabulous question, isn't it? That is definitely one for me, and I haven't got long. Okay, I think it's about recognising that grief is not an illness, bereavement is not a disorder, it's not an illness, and we, to be honest, wouldn't be assessing it as a disorder, mental health problem, until some way down the line. That's for human grief, and I'm thinking also animal grief. But I would say perhaps it's thinking about what's okay and manageable, but if it's interfering with your functioning and your day-to-day life and how you want to live it and the other things that you need to pay attention to, then perhaps seek some help. Again, I'd be thinking about, first stop is somebody that you really trust, that is going to just listen to you. That can be one of the most powerful tools, is somebody who'll just get it and listen and hear about it. In whatever form you can do that, and somebody will listen to you talk about it over and over again. If that doesn't work, then there are other options that are free and available on the NHS in the UK.
Thank you, Bron. Claire, Leah's written, I lost my horse very recently and found enormous comfort with having a very close fellow horsey friend at the same yard, also with her by my side when she was euthanased. That support at that moment made such a difference.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly that was my experience. You know, like I said in my talk earlier, had my trainer who knew my horse and me very well, and certainly supported and helped me through it. But you know, livery yards can be funny places, like, because everyone can often have an opinion on your situation and your animal, even though they know very little about it and just have their own kind of looking in view of things. So you know, equally it can be kind of really quite a tricky place to involve other people. So you know, I think it's really important to involve that person you trust rather than garner lots of sort of advice from lots of different sources. You know, speak to your vet and speak to your trusted friend, and pretty much ignore everyone else, because it's such a personal subject and situation, and as you've sort of heard tonight, everyone has different thoughts and feelings about what's right for them and what's right for their horse, and yeah, it can get clouded if you know.
Absolutely.
Can I add to that, Rowley? I think Claire's really, that's really important. I think that somebody alongside you for that immediate support when it happens, but also you've got somebody who shared that experience with you that you can then talk to. They were there, they know what happened, they know how it went. And you can shorthand it, you know, you don't have to explain everything. And I think that can be really valuable, that solidarity of a friendly witness who's been through it with you can be really meaningful.
And it very much picks up on your self-efficacy, self-belief, and being choosy about who you get.
I think, like, could I just add as well that it might, you know, for some people actually being there isn't the right thing, you know, and again, that's where that trusted friend can come in, who you know is going to take care of everything the way that you would want it to, while you're safe inside and, you know, sort of, you know what's happening. And I don't think it's, you know, shameful or hiding from it or whatever. It's just another way of coping from it. So I don't think everybody, you know, should feel like they have to be there and have to witness it and things like that. Because actually, if you're not emotionally stable enough to deal with what you're witnessing, going back to, you know, perhaps it leads into that lady's question about animal communications and stuff. Horses do sense your feelings. So if you're anxious, they'll start being anxious. And so, you know, better that they just are enjoying, you know, some treats from their friend, and that they go quietly, knowing that you're somewhere else, loving and feeling well about them. And
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The final question, I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to them all, but to Bron, my oldest horse, Kissair, ex-racehorse, was gifted to me age 8 to help when my sister died of cancer. He is now 30. He is the sweetest, most loving horse and given so much to me. I cannot deal with the fact that he may have to go in the future, because it feels like I'm losing my sister all over again. Frankly unbearable, and I cry about it now. Lately, it's making me extremely sad. How do I cope with this mentally?
That's what I was talking about, is that linking object. This is perhaps, you know, that tipping into some previous grief. Again, find somebody trusted that you can keep talking to and can support you throughout this, that understands that it isn't as simple as one bereavement. There's a whole lot of other stuff going on here, and see how it goes. And then perhaps if that doesn't work, find somebody who can do some specialist counselling for you that knows what they're doing around bereavement. But the fact that you're acknowledging it now and hurting, and knowing that you're hurting now and knowing what's going on, I'd say is a real strength. Well done.
Yeah. Thank you, Bron, and thank you to everyone for your questions and for sharing your experiences. It's been wonderful and truly heart-rending to read them and be part of it. So thank you for joining us tonight. Claire, we've obviously covered a huge amount of ground across 2 presentations and the discussion. What are your final thoughts?
Probably just around the preparedness for when it happens. Bronwen, I think, spoke in her presentation that the people, if they have a planned euthanasia, cope better, or their grief period is perhaps shorter, you know, because it's a planned thing. And certainly I know for myself that I had very clear thoughts about what I wanted and what I was going to do in a time, you know, when I wasn't, you know, emotionally involved about actually having to make those decisions. So I think if you have a clear plan when you're thinking straight, it's much easier to then deal with the emergency situation. So yeah, have a look at World Horse Welfare's Just In Case leaflet, which has an owner's guide for you to fill in, that you can then leave at your livery yard or leave with, you know, your friend, family, whoever is going to be your sort of first port of call in an emergency, with your vet even. And you know, it will one day perhaps really help out.
Thank you. And we've just put a link to that in the chat box there, and we'll also put that on Facebook as well. Bron, what are your final thoughts?
I would just mention cruise bereavement. I know the Blue Cross do bereavement, fantastic work, but especially that linking back to somebody or something that was lost. I would think about perhaps specialist cruise bereavement, which I should have mentioned, and really do more of what we're doing tonight. I think we've probably got the right people here, you know, that to be talking, keep talking about this, and talk to other people who haven't been here tonight about this. It's when it's not spoken about and talked about before and during and after that perhaps people struggle more. I think we should be talking about this a lot more than we do.
Bron, thank you very much. We entirely agree, and so we will certainly do another webinar around end of life. And as we've heard this evening, it is like so many things, it's a really complicated issue. But you know, certain things have come through around the planning, around, you know, finding that trustworthy friend to share, to get guidance and get support from. So, to Bron and to Claire, thank you. You were just brilliant, and I know will have really helped a lot of people, myself included, because euthanasia, putting our horses to sleep, will never be an easy decision, and it never should be an easy decision. But you know, there are all sorts of things we can do to help prepare ourselves and our horses. And so thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a really good session. I hope you've enjoyed it. We will be doing another one around end of life, as I've mentioned. If there's other topics you'd like us to cover, then please do let us know by emailing us on education@worldhorsewelfare.org. So I'll just finish by saying thank you again to Claire and to Bron, and thank you to everyone for joining us, and take great care of yourselves.